Okay, let's find out more about this. To join us on this breaking, developing story, Negar Mortazavi. She's a journalist and political analyst and senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Negar, thank you so much for joining us. I want you to try to put this in perspective for our international audience, if you would. Talk about the Quds and talk about the fact that Iran has not been targeted, at least not to this point.
Well, I think this week, essentially, with the fatal attack on the U.S. base, killing of 3 Americans, injured about 40 service members, and also with this retaliatory attack, we've entered another level of a war since October 7th, in which I've seen as minor escalations or small steps of escalation in multiple theaters. So we initially have the Israel-Hamas war that's happening in that theater, but there's also the Red Sea where the Houthis are engaged. We have the northern border of Israel with Hezbollah. We have the Iraqi militia in Iraq, backed by Iran, and obviously Tehran, who's seen as sort of the leader or the main coordinator of this axis of resistance. Now, I think what maybe the militia and also the response of the Iraqi militia and also Tehran, the comments that we saw, the statements this week, was that they realized that it took it maybe too far with that attack, the drone attack in Jordan, and they were anticipating a U.S. retaliation. But at the same time, I think this attack, the U.S. retaliation on Iraq and Syria, is falling short of attacking Iran inside Iranian soil, which is the major red line for Iran, and essentially, so it's seen as a small escalation, but also preventing that all-out war in the region. I
guess the concern in that area, even a small escalation can spiral out of control quickly. We have seen that happen before. We know that right now Syria's state-run media is reporting that U.S. aggression did result in fatalities and injury during the multiple attacks in the border with Iraq, as also within Syria. Your concerns about multi-tier tax, the fact we have not heard the last of this. It's going to go on.
Certainly. So this has been a cycle. As I said, we've only seen escalations since October 7th and very little attempt at diplomacy. I think, especially with the U.S. being the most powerful force here, the main supporter of Israel, we haven't really seen a diplomatic path being open to reduce the tension in that Israel-Hamas war, which connects to all of these theaters. Right. And as you're saying, and I absolutely agree, it is a volatile region. Each side believes they're just taking a calculated small step, but they don't want war. They want to prevent war. But once you start lighting that small fire here and there, at some point you could reach that point of escalation and explosion in the region, which is possible.
Let's talk about the forays into finding some diplomatic solution. We know Anthony Blinken has been to the region so many times, speaking not only with Netanyahu, but leaders in Qatar and other areas. And the fact that the United States does that, and at the same time says, we want peace in the region, we want to find a way forward, and then initiates these attacks. Does it lose credibility? Are there concerns about that? And secondly, what about other nations that are really reaching out, especially China, considering how this has now expanded to involve the Red Sea, and with so much of their economy based on exporting, China has a great deal to lose if this continues to spiral out of control.
Well, the U.S. has immense leverage over this conflict. Let's not forget, as Israel's closest ally, or Israel essentially being U.S.'s closest ally in the region. And I don't think they have used enough of that leverage. You can travel to the region, you can issue strong statements, but we haven't really seen major change in the format of the conflict, in the humanitarian crisis, in the civilian casualties in Gaza. And I think that's just a lack of usage of that leverage. You can't bomb your way through this region, as we've seen time and time again. Yes, the U.S. is the strongest army. Secretary Austin has said he has a lot of powerful tools or weapons, but it's just a situation that can explode here and there and eventually drag the entire region into it. Who's going to pay for that? Civilians. Who's going to pay for that? Various different countries and societies. And it's just, I don't think this is essentially the solution.
Let's bring in Einar Tangen. He now joins us from Beijing. Of course, Einar, senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives. I'm sure you had a chance to hear what our previous guest was talking about, the United States moving in, little fires here, little fires there, and certainly at some point this is going to explode into a huge fire unless calmer heads can move forward. Also, the fact that Antony Blinken has come to the region so many times from the United States and said we want to bring peace to the region, and now something like this happens in Syria and Iraq, and clearly, Einar, we know this is not the last of it. The United States is going to initiate more air attacks.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. I mean, you have a situation here, and I completely agree with my colleague, where it's been escalation. The repressive displacement tactics against Palestinians, both in the West Bank and Gaza, led to Hezbollah deciding that they were going to take a calculated gamble with a terrorist attack on Israeli soil. That has led to this genocidal movement by the Israelis within Gaza itself. There's also more repression going on in the West Bank. That has led to these other entities that are controlled or allied with Iran, trying to show that they are supporting the Palestinians. They're all trying to divide that they're somehow freedom fighters and that their cause is just because they're supporting them. Now, keep in mind, I mean, Iraq is Shia, all right, and the Palestinians are mostly Sunni. So you're having a situation where Sunni and Shia are coming together on common cause, and this should be something that is worrying people in Washington.
You use words like genocidal. I want to back up just a minute because, of course, South Africa brought that accusation to the World Court, and the World Court saying it wasn't genocide, but Israel needed to find a peaceful solution moving forward. And in talking about that peaceful solution, China, President Xi has proposed a 3-point proposal that China says is gaining recognized in international community circles. Your thoughts on that, and do you think China is going to have a significant play in this moving forward, trying to find some way to silence the guns and end the killing?
Well, I mean, China's record on this is fairly clear. Even before all this outbreak, they were trying to move Saudi Arabia and Iran closer together to end this the conflict situation in Yemen. And now China is trying once again to try to calm the waters. The irony is that the U.S. is turning to Beijing and saying, hey, get the Iranians to back off on the Red Sea. And then, a couple of days later, they're bombing new targets of opportunity. It's beginning to look to a lot in the Middle East that 3 American lives matter, but not the over 27,000 people lost in Gaza. So it's spiraling downward. China is trying its best, but China does not do what the U.S. Did in the past, which is impose a peace process or a set of ideas. They said, listen, here are some reasonable ideas, and people have to come to the table. It's very difficult to get people to come to the table while you're bombing them.
Yeah. Negar, I understand you're back with us. I'd like to get your take on what Einar just said, the fact that from an international standpoint, it appears that 3 American lives are worth more than the 27,000 who have been killed, the 66,000 wounded in Gaza.
And including some Americans within the hostages and also in those killed Palestinian Americans. So I think let me quote actually Joe Biden from 2019. This is Joe Biden himself saying no president should order a military strike without fully understanding the consequences. We don't need another war in the Middle East. He's referring to former President Trump. But Trump's actions towards Iran only make that more likely. I don't know if President Biden today is understanding the consequences of the way he's reacting. I think, again, going back to my initial point, I don't think diplomatic paths have been exhausted enough. Qatar has been ready to mediate. Oman has been ready to mediate. Some European partners, and also towards the east in Asia. I just think that the U.S. is not using enough of its leverage on Israel, one party to this conflict, and that the diplomatic path for the release of hostages, for the humanitarian pause and initially for a ceasefire in that conflict has not been used. And all of these other theaters and all of these other conflicts, mini or major conflicts that we're seeing, are connected essentially to what's happening in Gaza.
You know, Einar, that's a good point that Negar makes. The fact that we've heard from many countries that the United States has not put enough pressure on Israel to come to the negotiating table to find a way to move forward. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's mostly political. I mean, this is an election year. Biden has received the most amount of money of any candidate for president by the Israeli side, the caucus, whatever you want to call it. He's beholden to him. He's always thought of Israel as kind of a U.S. proxy in the Middle East, a way of kind of controlling things there. And he's hesitant to abandon it, especially if it comes with political costs. So at this point, it's not clear where he's going, because there are a lot of tough tactics, a lot of tough talk, but there is actually no end game or strategy in anything that the State Department is putting out there.
You know, Negar, let's look about the real concerns that this spreads even before just bloodshed in all nations. We've seen the impact on trade. We've seen what's happening in the Red Sea. The cost of shipping now products from China has gone up several fold. What are the concerns about this moving forward? When you start cutting in to economic measures, it seems countries really sit up quickly and take notice.
Well, that's correct. So the conflict is not going to stay in the Middle East. Maybe the violence will, although the refugees and the displaced and the millions of people and the casualties is not going to be limited to the Middle East, as we've seen in previous wars. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. This is something that the Europeans are also afraid with. The wave of refugees would immediately impact Europe and other neighboring areas. And also, as you mentioned, economy. It does impact global economy. It does create more instability. Now, the U.S. is a big, powerful economy country. The U.S. economy doesn't feel the impact immediately. And again, I agree with your guest to the point that this is also very much domestic politics for the U.S. Both the Gaza, the Israeli-Hamas conflict, and also this retaliation against Iran. There has been a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to go against Iran strong, hit the snake's head inside Iran, and essentially the format of the response is something that's very much connected to domestic politics here in Washington in an election year.
Right.
And so it's in a way connected, but it's also very domestic.
You know, Einar, I think that Negar makes a wonderful point in saying the U.S. economy has not felt it. If you've seen the financial markets, they're at an all-time high in the United States right now, which really I think has a lot of economists thinking, you know, something is going to happen quickly. If you look about the Suez Canal, a primary shipping way for China to get its westward shipments of goods, some 60% of its exports to Europe go through that area, according to a Middle East think tank. Your concerns as this does begin to have ripples throughout the global economy?
Well, absolutely. And it's not, you know, we always frame this in what's happening to the U.S., but quite frankly, this is really affecting North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe even more disproportionately. 40% of the world's container traffic goes through that area. Europe in particular is sensitive to this. And this is at a time when already the IMF has said that they're going to grow 0.9% next year. This definitely is going to make to downgrade that, especially if it continues on. So economically, the costs are there. But as I said, there does not seem to be any kind of concerted effort by the U.S. To address this issue, which at this point is putting pressure on Israel. And that pressure, I mean, stop sending bullets and bombs when you know that they're going to be killing civilians. It's a very simple way of registering that you're not going to support this war. Israel will not be able to continue bombing civilian targets when they don't have bombs. But, you know, there's another question here, and that is, why is the U.S. in all of these areas? I mean, why are they in Syria and Iraq? Iraq has asked them to leave, so is Syria. You know, they present targets of opportunity to groups who are trying to push an idea that they are against, they're the resistance against an oppressive power.
Yeah, and
you know, if you put candy in front of a baby, don't be surprised when it takes it.
And Negar, I think that We haven't heard Joe Biden's critics really speak out yet. It's going to happen, and especially when you contrast the images of him at Dover Air Force Base while the caskets of the 3 U.S. Troops come home. At the same time, launching the attack against Iraq and Syria. Some are going to say it's not enough. Some are going to say it's too much. It's really going to play into this whole election year theme. Where do you think the United States goes from here? How does it move forward?
Well, the U.S. economy might not feel this immediately, but the U.S. is already paying with blood. And this is something going back to the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, and the multiple theaters that the U.S. has and still is engaged with. That's something that the American, I think, public, and this is not just a Democratic or Republican thing, is not very much on board with. The majority of the American public is not on board with another big Middle Eastern war. And this is the message that we've heard in the last 4 presidential elections. Remember, 2 Obamas, 1 Trump, and the last Biden, is that nobody is interested in another big Middle East war. Now, how you frame that, how you sleepwalk into that next big Middle East war without realizing that you're doing it, with framing it. I mean, the framing can go so long. Once you're in it, once you've escalated, once you called it retaliation, but really taken it to the next level at some point without exhausting the diplomatic channels that exist. I think that's something that the American society, the American public is going to feel maybe even before the economic effects.
Okay, Negar and Einar, can I get you to sit tight for just 1 minute? When you're going to go back to our newsroom, our Francis Coe has some more information about these U.S.-led strikes in targets in Syria and Iraq. Francis?
Well, Sean, I just want to reiterate what we know so far. Actually, the U.S. struck, again, 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, 3 facilities in Iraq, and 4 in Syria belonging to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Quds forces, and affiliated militia groups. The U.S. says those strikes, some using long-range bombers, were successful, though it's not clear how many militants were killed or wounded, and all U.S. aircraft are now out of harm's way. The White House issued a statement saying that the U.S. does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, but had said these retaliatory attacks were coming after the drone attack in Jordan this past Sunday that killed 3 American soldiers. Their remains were brought back to U.S. soil at Dover Air Force Base on Friday. Washington says the strikes may have begun tonight, but they will not end tonight. And it is widely expected these attacks could last over the next several days. Now, no official response from Iran yet, but it had threatened earlier this week to, quote, decisively respond to any U.S. attack on its territory or its interests or citizens abroad. And one added note, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is scheduled to travel to the Middle East on Sunday. It is his 5th time going to that region. He'll go to Israel, the West Bank, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar. So it will be very interesting to see how this time around these diplomatic efforts will play out as these attacks continue.
Okay,
Sean?
Francis. Einar, we have about a minute and a half left, and I want both of you to have a chance to chime in on this. The U.S. says it does not seek fighting in the Middle East. What are the chances that this limited airstrike works and stops Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and perhaps brings a sense of non-fighting to the region for a short time?
About 0. You know, this going back to a quote from Joe Biden. You know, are the bombings working against the Houthis in the Red Sea? He said no, but we're not going to stop, and that's really, in a nutshell, the U.S. position.
Okay, Negar, we have about 45 seconds. Can I get your response to that?
Yes, I think the administration is trying to essentially walk a fine line, balancing what they see as establishing deterrence without escalation. But I don't think the statements are enough. It also really depends on the level of casualties, destruction, but mostly casualties. But I think the Iranian statement and also the statement from Iraqi militia suggesting they will halt the attacks also was a sign that they don't want to be the one escalating this into a big out war. So we'll have to wait and see what the result of the attacks are. But this is essentially playing with fire for both sides, and it could really take it to the next level.
Okay. Negar Mortazavi. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that. I apologize. And Einar Tangen, thank you so much for your insight. I certainly appreciate it. Once again,